Thank you all for being here. Good afternoon. My name is Russell Granite, and I am the acting president of Lincoln Center. Almost a year ago, Lincoln Center and the Center for Ballet and the Arts began talking about what a collaboration together might look like. And we talked about many things, but I have to say, the brain is the dancer is the one topic that resonated with us that seemed both interesting and timely. I say timely because I'm not sure if you saw the recent report of arts and arts education within our public school system in the US. It was reported that on the public school, on both the elementary and secondary level, 94% of our schools offer a program in music. 83% of our schools, this is throughout the country, offer a program in visual art. 4% offer a program in theater, and 3% offer a program in dance. So those are extraordinary numbers. What do the musicians and the music teachers know that the dance teachers don't? Are we telling our story most effectively in the benefits of what dance can do? Today, collectively, we hope to share what we learn about the brain, about our well-being, and better, and over time, get better at telling our particular story. Because it's of great concern that if it's at 3%, where do we go from there? Hopefully up. But I do think it's all of us collectively getting together and being better at telling that story. Today is a thrilling day for us, and we're thrilled that it is here. We have some of the world's best dancers with us here today. We have Russell Jansen and Lauren Lovett of the New York City Ballet. Playing piano as you walked in and accompanying them today, we have Cameron Grant. So thank you very much for being here. Let's give them a round of applause, please. In the audience, we have individuals who are important to Lincoln Center. Our board chair, Catherine Farley, our devoted trustees, representatives from our international advisory councils, and foundation supporters. Thank you all for supporting Lincoln Center and for being here on this special day. I would also like to give a warm welcome to the Center for Ballet and the Arts Center Circle members, advisory council members, fellows, Rafa Yuste, Peter Domenical from Columbia University, and Tom Carew, a neuroscientist and dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences from NYU, who you will hear from in just a moment. Finally, I want to acknowledge our collaborators. We could not do this alone, and it's important that Lincoln Center partners with great organizations throughout the city. The Center for Ballet and the Arts at New York University, Jennifer Homans and Lauren Keel, have been wonderful partners and excellent programmers. And I also want to give a thanks to the Juilliard School. This space, the program would not be possible without their incredible support. And with that, I have the great honor in introducing to you the president of the Juilliard School, Damien Wetzel.
Thanks so much, Russell. It's thrilling to have this taking place in our walls. It shows that we care about how we think, and what spurs thinking. And that really is, the lady to my left, Jennifer Homans, the founding director of CBA, Center for Ballet and the Arts, has explored these questions over these last years, but more than that, she's investigated them in ways that have brought it to life, not just for any one constituency. And building on Russell's remarks about the paucity of programs across disciplines, that is the one thing that I have to say about Juilliard. We are in this extraordinary position, but it's a position we need to take advantage of, which is why I'm so glad to welcome all of you here today. We have a building full of music, full of dance, and full of theater. And if you came through the lobby, you see we're also getting to be full of visual art, and we're also full of thinking and ideas and curiosity, and how these things inform each other. That is the future of young artists. That is the future of art. So having this within these walls is super important to me. It's also thrilling to have my colleagues, my dear Lauren Lovett over there, who I've gotten to know over these years as a dancer and as a choreographer, and I believe in so much. To have her in the room as a young artist, not only performing, but someone who creates work, involved in this investigation, gives us all hope, and me especially. And Russell Jansen as well, and my collaborator for so many years, Cameron Grant, on the piano. We're so lucky to have them with us today to bring this into the world of movement, really, that it's not theoretical. I also want to acknowledge our extraordinary director of the dance division, Alicia Graff-Mack, who's with us today. And you'll see other Juilliard people filtering in and out throughout the day because everybody's busy, everybody's doing different things, I myself included, but everybody wants a little piece of what's going to happen in this room today. So with that, I'll just say thank you. Thank you, Russell, for asking us to partner with you on this. It means a lot, and this door is always open to ideas and to the possibilities that a gathering like this represent. So now it's my real thrill to welcome my friend here, Jennifer Homans, who will lead us through this day. And I'll be here, as I said, with you. And I also want to just say the collaboration between Juilliard, an institution like CBA, and Lincoln Center, and all the constituents is so essential. And that's what this represents in some way, that this is not narrow, this is wide. And through that width, we can actually go so much deeper than we can when we just focus in our own little lanes. So thank you and welcome, Jennifer. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here. I'm Jennifer Homans, and I have to say it's actually personally very touching and meaningful to me that we're doing this here at the Juilliard School with Damien, because Damien and I both began as dancers. I watched him, admired him. He at New York City Ballet, me at a much lower level. But now, in some kind of mirror imaging, we're both involved in education and the arts more broadly. And it's kind of wonderful that our paths have met here. So I'm the founder and director of New York University's Center for Ballet and the Arts, as you've heard many times. The center is a research institute for the performing arts focused on dance, and our mandate is quite straightforward and simple. It's to bring together two great houses of knowledge, the university and the performing arts, around the study and performance of dance. And we're very happy to be working with both Juilliard and Lincoln Center to bring you this program. The brain is the dancer. So today, what we've done is we've brought together distinguished neuroscientists from Columbia and from New York universities, along with dancers from the New York City Ballet, the Mark Morris Dance Group, to investigate an essential question. And it's an essential question not only for dancers, but I think for every life. And the question is, how do we move? And from there we can ask, how do we dance? Movement and gesture, I would say, are fundamental to being human. We're moving all the time, walking, bending, twisting, saying something, waving to a friend, raising a hand, pointing, signaling, insisting. We recognize people by the way they move, even from behind. You can see somebody down the street in front of you and say, oh, that's Russell. Oh, that's Lauren. I know that because I know how they stand, how they move, how they position themselves. Even the way we talk constantly references movement. We say, go on, put your best foot forward. Take the first step. That film or dance or book moved me, etc. And movement and gesture, I would say, are really primal. They're like deeds. And in that sense, they can be more powerful even than words. I would ask you, which transports you more intensely into feeling? The words, I love you, or the kiss? The words, I care for you, or the embrace, or the outstretched arm? In some very basic, essential way, we really are how we move. Now, most of us would say, yes, we are how we move, but we do it without thinking. We just move around in the world. But today we're going to show you that no one moves without thinking. The brain does it. The brain is the dancer. But of course, it's not quite that simple. The brain is part of the body, and the body is not a robot taking commands from a master control center, if there even is such a control center, which I'm told by some of the neuroscientists who are joining us today is a source of some debate. The body has its own conditions and rules, its own deep connections to the brain. So the question, one of the many questions before us today, is how do our brains and bodies make us move and dance? Now, I'm just going to take you through briefly an outline of what we're going to do here today so that you know what's coming. We're going to approach this question in 3 parts. The first part is, I am a person. And that part has to do with how are we in our ordinary lives, just us, regular people, walking, moving, walking without bumping into each other, a body existing in space. And for this section, Tom Carew here is going to talk to us about how the brain controls movement in our everyday lives. The second section is going to be, I am a dancer. And the way that we can make that transition is that dancing is, after all, just a more complicated version of how we move every day. It's a poetic elaboration of movement and gesture, often set to music. So the question before us in this session will be, how does the brain learn new and complicated movement? And how does it turn everyday movement into dance? For this, we're going to hear from Rafa Yuste, a neuroscientist at Columbia University, and also from Russell and Lauren, principal dancers of the New York City Ballet. The third section, we've done I am a person and I am a dancer. The third section is I am ill and I cannot move. And this session will explore what happens when the ways we move and dance break down. In this part of the program, we're going to investigate a disease that specifically compromises movement, Parkinson's disease. It's also a disease that can be helped by dance. We're going to talk with dancers and teaching artists from the Mark Morris Dance Group program, Dance for Parkinson's Disease. And the question before us here will be, can dance re-engage movement that has failed? Can the brain and the body relearn? And if so, how? So that's kind of the plan of the day. Our sessions are going to be informal. We'll take a brief break around 4 o'clock so you can stretch your legs and have something to eat. After the third session, everyone, scientists, dancers, teaching artists, the whole gang is going to come on stage and we can continue the conversation, take questions, and then we'll end. We're going to begin, because we're in this beautiful dance studio at the Juilliard School where dancers train and artists are formed, and because dance is the highest, most evolved form of movement, I think. We're going to begin here with a dance. Lauren and Russell will perform a pas de deux from the ballet Polyphonia with choreography by Christopher Wheeldon, music by Ligeti. Our pianist, as you know, is Cameron Grant. And we'll see this dance now, and we'll see it again at another point in the day so that we can apply what we've learned and see the dance perhaps in a slightly different way. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lauren Lovett and Russell Jansen.
That's what we call a tough act to follow. I'm Tom Carew. My day job is a neuroscientist. My night job is being dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science at NYU. Don't tell my friend Chandrika I said that. I try to do both. But this is really a wonderful chance to not only meet you, but to bring together what Jennifer has already introduced, which is the confluence of an academic environment, a theatrical environment, and a dance environment in a unique way. So I feel privileged to be part of it. So what I'm going to do is tell you how you're built. I'm going to tell you what this physical platform is that we all own to get around the world, effortlessly and unconsciously, but it's pretty cool. And at the end of my chat with you, I hope you further appreciate this amazing thing between your ears called your brain that takes care of you without thinking about it. And then a bit later, after I've given you essentially the building blocks of behavior, the building blocks of how we get around the world and engage with the world, my good friend and colleague, Rafa Yusta, will elaborate on how now that platform is engaged with learning. How do you learn to do something other than get around the planet? How do you learn to do something as magnificent as we just witnessed? So that's sort of the game plan for the beginning. So let me just begin by asking you all to do me a favor. Close your eyes. And whoops, one of you has your eyes open. Come on, guys. Get with I'm a teacher, right? And all of you raise your right arm and keep your eyes closed. Damn, good group. All right, go Lauren, you're the best. Okay, every one of you knows where your hand is at this moment in time. Every one of you knows exactly where your hand is. You can put it down, we're good. How'd you do that? How did you know where your hand was? You can open your eyes, by the way. We're cool. Or you may choose not to if it gets too boring, but we'll run with that one. But seriously, how did you know where your arm is? It's at the same time effortless and magical, because you can't tell me how. It'd be like me telling me, teach me how to stick out my tongue. You can show me. There's no way in the world you can elaborate that. That just comes with the program. So you knew where your arm was in space because of things called receptors. The little devices built in your shoulders and your hands and every part of your body, so to alert your brain, and therefore you, where you are in space at every moment in time. So it's at the same time effortless, but pretty cool that your brain can let you know where you are in space without you ever thinking about it. And let me tell you how you're built. This will be somewhat academic. I'll try to make it as simple as I can. But you've got a spinal cord down your back. Your brain's between your ears. And spinal cord's connected at the back to the brain with an important kind of cable that goes down the spinal cord. And your back is called the dorsal surface, and your stomach's called the ventral surface. That's weird, because dorsal means down, like the dorsal fin of a shark. It's on its back. But why am I calling your back dorsal? That's because it was named when you're on all fours. When animals are on all fours, your back's up and your stomach's down. So if you go to the doc and she says your dorsal column, she'll pat you on the back. That's the dorsal. The reason I'm telling you that is the brain is organized. You're organized in a very beautiful way. The back is sensory and the front is motor. So the sensory systems, the way you feel and touch and see and taste, well, those are in your head, but certainly the way you touch, comes into the spinal cord on your back in little tiny balls of neurons that harvest information from all over your body. That's the sensory side. The motor side is now I'm moving my hands, so there's motor neurons literally on the ventral side of my cord going out and telling my fingers to move. So that's how you're built. And I'll just illustrate it because of the beauty of how we're organized. I don't want to know if you have, but you probably have, or someone in the room has an uncle or a friend has had herpes. I've not, but buddies of mine have, and it's horrible. Turns out that if you have herpes, you will have a rash that goes right down the midline, wraps around, and goes right down the midline like a patch. And that's because the sensory neurons on that backside, the dorsal side, are not random. They have patches allocated to them all over your body. And if they get this virus, a herpes virus, the skin reflects that, and it'll be it's called a dermatome. It'll be a perfect reflection of the innervation of that patch of your skin by the dorsal sensory neurons. Then the motor cells on the other side, and the sensory neurons talk to the motor neurons and make you move. So that's sort of the basic architecture of movement. So there's kind of two worlds. There's your inside world, and there's your outside world. The inside world has two ways of knowing what it's about. Some of them are called proprioceptors. So when we saw those beautiful dances, they knew exactly where in space because just like you did with your arm, proprioceptors are telling them all the time, there's my arms, there's my legs, there's my head, and so on. There's another kind of receptor that is important, but you don't think about a lot. And it's called interoceptors, and that's how you've got a stomachache. That tells you if you feel yourself breathing. So there's sensors inside your body that just tell you how you're doing. And then there's other sensory devices called receptors that tell you where your arms and legs are in space. Then there's the extra receptors. And you're using that right now because you can see me and you can hear me. And if you rub your skin, you'll feel it. They tell you what the outside is. So that's your ears, your eyes, and so on. So that's the sensory sheet that we're built on. Let me tell you the simplest behavior we got. It's a reflex. You've all done it. You've gone to the dock. You sit on a table, and your leg has to be hanging down. You can't be load-bearing. Your leg's hanging down, and a doc will come up, and she'll use this little weird triangular hammer that's red. You've seen it. And she'll whack your knee just below the knee, and your knee jerks out. That's the most elementary reflex you have. It's called a knee jerk, duh, because it's a knee jerk. And what's really going on is that when you whack just below your knee, you're stretching a tendon. And the tendon's actually attached to the muscle in your thigh. So it's actually stretching the thigh muscles and making what's called an extension reflex, and the leg comes out. And that's a way to interrogate the status of the spinal cord. So when a neurologist wants to see how you're doing, your kid goes and they tap that reflex, it's a way to say, are things intact? It's the most elementary behavior you've got. And even that is not fixed. It's not robotic. So there's this movement. It's really kind of weird. So what I just said, if you tap the underneath the knee, the leg extends, flexion reflex. If you put your hands together and push really hard, you'll make that reflex bigger. And often docs will do that to see how your brain, which is exerting that effort, is modulating that reflex. So even at the level of this tiny little building block, that's sort of an elementary piece of behavior, that reflex. The way you know what's happening is by receptors. There's receptors, and I'm going to ask you in a minute to feel your own muscles. There's a receptor in your, let's say, in this case, in your thigh, that's stretched when you got whacked with that little hammer on the tendon, and it contracts. To know what a muscle or tendon, you don't know what a tendon feels like. I bet you none of you really know what a tendon feels like. So flex your arms at right angles. If you got on a coat, it might not work. So do this, flex at the right angle. Feel your bicep. That's a muscle, yeah? You know what a muscle feels like. Just go down towards your elbow where that muscle attaches, and you feel that cable? That's your tendon, and it is not stretchy. It is a cable. It's like steel. So you all feel it? Nobody knows where it is until you feel it. It's remarkable that it's so stiff, and it's connected to your forearm. So the way you move is that muscle contracts, and then across the joint, the tendon grabs the forearm and brings it forward. Again, super elementary, and automatic. But that reflex I just described to you is exactly how we put together, different kinds of movements. And the input from that are from, I won't go into it, from receptors in your muscle, the spindles, they're in parallel, and receptors in the tendons called tendon organs, and they're in series, and they sense the tension and cause reflexive behaviors. So one thing for our dancers, any athletes, when you're warming up, don't bounce. When you're warming up, drape. You drape like a rag doll. You guys are phenomenal. But if you bounce, you cause stretch reflexes, and your muscles won't stretch. They'll just say the opposite. They'll contract. So if you know that intuitively by your training, but if you're going to really stretch, I used to be a runner back in the day, and you sort of cross your legs and you just drape slowly, and it kind of hurts because you're stretching the muscle. But these guys who bounce, all they're doing is working against themselves because they're triggering a stretch reflex. So duh. All right. So now let's go. Who likes chicken or turkey? Anybody? Okay. So do you like white meat, dark meat? White meat? Dark meat. Okay. So you like fast muscle and you like slow muscle. Yes. I know it took, if you told your grandma great slow muscle today, I don't think she would be pleased. But the fact is that there's two kinds of muscles in your bodies and birds' bodies and everything. There's the kinds that are keeping me standing up right now called postural muscles, and they're red muscles. Why are they red? They got a lot of stuff called myoglobin. They're slow, they're steady, they work hard, they can sustain for a long time. That's the kind of muscle you want to keep you standing up. So if a chicken is walking, he or she is using their leg, their red muscles. And that's why the drumstick is red, because it's a leg. The white muscle is called fast twitch, and that's the breast muscles that they use to fly. So when you have elevation and extension, that's a really rapid movement. And birds, any flying animals, and there's a lot of other examples, have to have these muscles that really can work quickly and powerfully. And that's these so-called white muscles or twitch muscles. And then there's blends in between. But already you can see the architecture of your body is not just a bunch of elements. It's tuned to the kinds of jobs you have to do. And you can imagine a crane that stands on 1 foot for a day and a half. You look at it and say, oh my God. They lock into that position without an effort because there's the biomechanics of it, but mainly their postural muscles are super strong, so they can hang on to that kind of position for a long time. So next time you have thigh muscle, just think you're eating myoglobin. It'll make your meal romantic. Now we got to get around the world. We saw these magnificent dancers get around effortlessly. That has to do with locomotion. And before I go into it, Lauren, I'm going to ask you as my buddy up here to come on up. And I'm going to tell you something. Jen loves me to talk about it every time. Locomotion, it turns out, is a controlled fall. We always have. So turn around, just walk, just walk. All right, now stop. Nope, keep going. Now stop. Oh, never mind. It's hard. Yeah, you can hang in there. I'm just going to tell you about my trip to Sequoia. No, what you just saw, Jennifer, is there, coming back, one leg is load bearing at all times. Locomotion is the most unstable act we've got. A cockroach has got it down because cockroaches have 3 feet on the ground at all times, so that's stability. We are not. We have this control fall where this is called swing. I'm in flexion, right? This is called stance, where I'm in extension. And as Lauren and I walk, I'm going through swing and stance, and at every step, there's an instability for the next step. Thanks. Now, if you don't have parents, Mary Jo and I want to adopt you. So, but I'm serious. Think about the fact that we can walk across the planet constantly in a controlled fall. And you don't even think about it. It just happens. Every once in a while on the street, you catch that toe coming across and boom, now you're unstable as hell because you got 1 foot on the ground. So this locomotion that we rely on every day to get around the planet is fundamentally unstable. How does the brain handle that? It builds in that spinal cord. You've got something called, the fancy word is pattern generators. Extension, flexion, left, right. And that all of the machinery for that pattern of walking is in your spinal cord. The command to use it, when I asked Lauren to walk, her brain said, okay, guys, in my spinal cord, get with it. So there's a bunch of signals coming from the brain and going down to the circuits called oscillators or pattern generators in her spinal cord, and her left and right leg proceeded in that motion. There's a region in the brain, fancy name is MLR, mesencephalic locomotor region, don't worry about it. And it was discovered by some folks who could activate it with a cat on a treadmill. And now think about, you've all seen cats walk. And actually, I'm going to ask you in a moment to visualize a jungle cat. For not, just think of, your cat at home and she's walking across, but she's on a treadmill. So the normal kind of walking with a cat, more or less, is right foot forward, left back foot forward, and they alternate. This is called an alternating gait, left, right. And that's pretty routine. And now have you ever seen them start to lope? Going faster and faster, and then all of a sudden, now I want you to visualize a jungle cat, because they're magnificent. That you see them walking, it's alternating gait. Then all of a sudden, they go loping and kind of trotting, and then boom, when they go really fast, those front paws go together, the back paws, and they put their front paws literally right between their back legs in that magnificent, can't you see it, run across the plane? So I just told you about 3, I'm going to just call them 2 patterns, walking and galloping. The walking is alternating, galloping is synchronous front-back. The spinal cord has a whole bunch of oscillating circuits that choreograph everything there. That's where the timing is, left, right, front, back. The brain says, get with it. And the brain has no pattern in it. The brain just turns up the volume. The brain says, walk, trot, even more, start running. So the information coming down is not patterned at all. All the patterns in the spinal cord. And that's sort of how. These are called central pattern generators. It doesn't matter. They're built in your cord. Why is this important? Christopher Reeve's important. Why is it important? It's because anybody you know, and probably someone in this room, God bless, knows someone who has a spinal compromise. It might be high, which is the worst thing possible. It might be mid-level. You've got 4 levels, 4 pieces, domains in your spinal cord. It doesn't matter what their names are. And if they're any way interrupted, car accident, Christopher Reeve in the horse accident, whatever happens, sometimes even by inflammation, then you've cut off communication between your brain and your spinal cord. You can stay alive if you have a brain that breathes for you, because the pattern generation of breathing is here. It's not up here. Well, it's actually here. But the fact is that a lot of folks who are either quadriplegic or paraplegic some of the therapy, this is done at UCLA, especially with friends of mine, is you keep them walking artificially. You put them on a bike and the bike will move them. Why? You want to keep those pattern generators working. Because someday if we can reconnect it, rock and roll. Now we can get it back. So it's really important to, I mean, I'm not being glib. It's really a big problem to do that reconnection. Nerve cells don't like to grow back for reasons I could tell you if you like, or Rafi could even more, he's a doc. But the fact is that the way the brain engages that circuitry, if you disconnect it, the machinery's still there. And if we can find a way artificially to engage it or to reconnect it, then we give back, you know, the ability to get around the planet by locomotion. So that's kind of why it's important. The last thing I want to tell you about is telling the future. Okay, Lauren, come back. So, and I'm going to have Lauren do something, and then I'm going to ask anybody in the room to guess. And you can't cheat, because I already told you. All right, so face the audience, and just, when I ask you to, when I say 3, raise your right arm straight over your head. So 1, 2, 3. Boom. Huh? It's Juilliard. I mean, come on. So in the audience, someone guess, what is when Lauren said to her brain said to her body, raise my right arm, what's the first muscle in her body that you think contracted? Take a shot. The very first muscle that would be active at all. Stick a hand up. Come on. Take it. Shoulder's a great guess. Wrong, but a great guess. No. Absolutely reasonable. She's raised. What do you think? The brain's not a muscle. It's the one calling the shots, but it's actually a chunk of neurons. It's about 10 to the 13th of them. There's a lot of them. No, the answer is really fun. And your instinct's perfect. The shoulder seems right. Remember, it's a right arm. The first muscle to contract is left thigh. The left thigh. Duh. Why? Thanks, kid. We're good. No, but is she good or not, huh? No, it's your left thigh. Now, what do you think? Why do you think the left thigh would go? Balance. Perfect. The brain knows in advance. The brain tells the future. The brain knows in advance there's going to be a change in the physical plant. The brain, before she raised her arm, her brain said, raise your right arm, and it says, there's going to be a balance issue. So you get ready for it. It tells the future that. The brain, that you're going to move, and the brain anticipates that and magically says, get ready, before you ever actually execute the motion, because it knows in advance. I'm going to ask you something else. It's going to be weird, but by now you got to know me. I want you all to look straight ahead. Okay, so keep your head straight ahead. And now I want you to, let's see, your left. So towards the piano, everybody, without moving your head, sweep your eyes over to the left side of the room where the piano is. And now sweep it back. And now do it again. Sweep your eyes all the way over to the piano without moving your head and sweep it back. Did any of you see the world move? Because it did. The world moved on your retina. When you moved your eyes from right to left, the world swept across your retina in the opposite direction. Every time. I wouldn't kid you. So if you move your eyes, the world goes that way. But you don't think the world's moving. Why not? Much as your instincts already. Good job. It's that the brain's saying, I'm going to be moving my eyes, ignore the fact that the world's moving the other way. Now, I guarantee if I could, with a visual scene, move the world the way it is, your eyes would track it, and your brain would say, the world's moving. What the heck? Right? But when you move your eyes, the brain always knows in advance, it ain't the world, it's me. And even in something, you probably haven't heard of saccades, but these little twitches, your eye is constantly twitching, and the reason for that is your retina saturates. So your eyes, if I'm looking at you, my eyes are actually doing that. I'm exaggerating. I don't know it, but it's doing it all the time. They're called saccades, real quick movement. During each saccade, every, tens of seconds in a row, it says there'll be a blur because the world's moving, right? Because the eye is moving. And what happens is during each one of those, the acuity of the eye shuts down. So you don't know it. Because it's like such a rapid snapshot. You don't know it. But during it, the brain doesn't want to see the blur. So the brain says, this is the eye moving, shut down, being very acute. And then it turns right back up again. This is something that Luke Teuber at MIT years ago called corollary discharge. Here's the deal. If I'm going to move my eyes, if I'm going to move anything, the brain first says, okay, I'm going to use part of my brain to move my eyes. Got it. But before that initiation of movement, another signal sent to a place going, ignore this, it ain't the world, it's me. So the brain can tell the future impact. When Lauren moved her arms, it knew that there'd be a change in the physical plan. When you moved your eyes, it knows the world's not moving. So what I'm really telling you is that the way we are built is nothing short of magical. Thank God we don't have to think about it. It's all just happens because evolution has driven this amazing machine called our ability to navigate the world, to engage with the world. So let me stop there and just foreshadow the fact that I've given you a little sense of, I hope I've let you appreciate how deeply our brains engage the world every day in motion. But there's much more to that. That's just getting around the planet. But you saw how much better getting around the planet is these magnificent dancers are. And my good buddy Rafe a little bit later will tell you about how this machine I've just taught you about can be taught to learn and move. So thanks very much. No. Now I'd like to welcome Jennifer back with Lauren and Russell to chat about how they get ready to dance.
Okay, so is this on? Yeah, what we're going to do now is just talk for a few minutes about what they're experiencing and what goes on actually in the brain and the body of a dancer. So, I'm going to ask you some questions, but just jump right in, okay? I think maybe the place to begin is really with class and with training and just to explain, to get inside a little bit what's going on when you train your body. So do you want to just sort of talk a little bit about what you do in the morning and how you, go.
Well, I think most dancers have different ways of warming up their bodies in the morning, but the thing that we all start with together and what you start with when you first start dancing is pliés. And that's just, you're standing with your legs. Just the plie is just where you bend, where you bend your knees. And every class starts with this very basic exercise.
So you do this very basic exercise, and you do it once, twice?
A lot of times. So it starts with demi-pliés. That's a half plie, half bend. And then we do grand pliés, and we make them a little bit bigger. And we have 5 positions in ballet that we start first, second. There's third, fourth, and fifth, but we usually just do fourth and then fifth, and we skip third. Don't ask me why. We just do. And for me personally, that first combination, I like it to be exactly the same every day. It really bothers me when a teacher comes in and gives me a different plie combination, and I think it's because I have trained my brain, just so fluidly to work in this very specific way that my right ankle cracks at one point. I know that when I go forward, I get that stretch up through my spine, and then I've got to get my backward bending motion in a gentle way first before I do my side-to-side motions in second. So if a teacher changes it up, it's not a bad thing because that happens as a student a lot, but now as a professional dancer, I know within myself I really love it to be the same. And I think it's just a mental prep for my day that it just very much centers me. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. Predictability, knowing what it's going to be.
But that grows with time, because ballet gets easier, I think, with time.
Easier to do, you mean?
Yeah, easier to do. Because when you're first learning how to do a step, I feel like, the very first time I learned a demi-plie, I felt like I had to think about 100 different things. I have to turn out my leg. Where's my weight? Not in the heels. Your teacher gives you all the corrections, and you have a million things going on, and the music's playing, and you're trying to be on time, and you have to think about your combination. So I think those reactors, they start to connect. As you
do it more, it becomes, it's a kind of, we all know this from our experience, right, of daily life. It's just a very complicated version of it. Mm-hmm. And would you say that by the time it becomes more routine, as it were, are you thinking less?
Just differently.
Just differently.
Yeah.
Well, I think this fall, in the fall season, there are a bunch of ballets that I'd prepared a lot for, and then one that I got thrown on the day of. And so I was thinking about how I was present in that performance versus other ones. And usually, and in that ballet, on the third time I did it, I just blanked out on stage and I couldn't remember. I had no idea what came next, and I just stood there while my partner kind of danced around me. And in the season, I don't know. I mean, it's happened to me other times too when I've been much more prepared. But I do think that usually by the time we get out on stage, we don't think a huge amount. And I think what Lauren was saying about these exercises, that in the morning, it's also, I mean, we're also preparing mentally for our day. So it's easiest for us when we don't have to think about the combination, if it's ones that we kind of know has a pattern that we're expecting.
It allows your body to move. I mean, I just remember so Balanchine famously said, right, don't think, just dance. And people always think, oh, well, that just means be stupid, but it doesn't actually. I don't think so. I think it's more to do with this. It's like, can you get to a place where you turn off your brain? I mean, does that sound right to you, or? Well,
I mean, I think like dancing with Lauren,
just
now, and then we just danced together in this last week, and we don't often dance together. And when I think of that, don't think, just dance, I think Lauren's dancing really embodies that in a really wonderful way, because I think that she's very present on stage, and it's more about, she kind of follows how she's feeling on stage, or follows what
instincts.
So it's like she's obviously doing the choreography, but there's a spontaneity to it, and I think that's what and it's not that Lauren hasn't thought about the steps or isn't thinking while she's doing it, but it's not like I'm going to do exactly the same thing every time. And Lauren also has a facility that makes it very easy to do that, because I think that I know there are lots of dancers in our company who feel like they have to think much more about always pointing their feet or about straightening their legs or something. So I think there's different.
Well, that's training, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
But I mean, even, all of us have had similar amounts of training, and there are people who still need to actively point my toes. And I don't think Lauren and I, but neither of us have to think about that as much. But.
Yeah.
I know what it is. It's a hyper presence of mind, because I am thinking very intensely. It's just I like my body to get to a place where a lot of it is involuntary, so that I can zoom in on something very specific that I either want to show the audience, like today I want to show you my toe, and everything goes into that foot placement. And then other times it's an emotional quality. I just want them to feel like my heart. I want them to feel my sadness or my grief. And then you have to turn other things off to have hyper awareness in that one area. Because if I'm thinking about everything all the time, the value of what I'm giving everything kind of stays the same. So yes, I think it's a not thinking as much as it is a hyper awareness of certain things. And that's what makes dancing so much fun to me, because if it's the same mathematic equation every time, why?
But I do think it's rare that we're out on stage actually thinking about the steps.
Yeah.
Like we're thinking about the dancing, but not about necessarily what comes next.
Because that you already got.
You're
That's
right.
in your body, as we say. Right?
There is the math side of dancing, and you learn it when you first get into class. It's complicated. Whenever I teach kids and you try to give them a combination that feels easy to us, the kids sit there like, I have to change from my right foot to my left foot back on the inside of the bar, and their whole brain, you can tell the class kind of loses it. If they're not developed enough, they can't go there yet mentally. So you just get faster with the graph, with the mathematics side, because once you have that down, you can move on.
Like memorizing
Yes.
multiplication tables. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, multiplication tables, same thing. There, you get to a place where it becomes more automatic, and we can pick up combinations pretty fast. We can pick up choreography faster as you get older, and if you practice. So, yeah.
So here's another aspect to this. You are talking about class and you're talking about rehearsal. And many people here probably know this, but it's interesting to me that, musicians, when they practice, often practice alone. Actors often practice alone. Dancers or train, dancers always practice and train together in a studio with lots of other dancers, or at least many. Can you just talk a little bit about how that, I'm sure you've also worked alone, of course. What is that, does that matter that you're with other people in the studio, or is that just, the social aspect of it, is it important for you physically? Or?
I feel like we're going to have very different answers to this because we have different personalities. But
Well, that's
you want to
okay.
go first? Me? Okay. It's both for me because when I my very first class, I was 11 years old, and everybody in my class already knew the basics of ballet, and I was the first one coming in who didn't know what pliés were, and I felt hyper insecure. Like I had this insecurity coming in that everybody was watching me, and I was in this group of people, and I needed to be perfect, and I had to learn really fast. And then it got a little bit better. Same thing happened with New York City Ballet. When I got my job as an apprentice, I thought, I'm in this collective group and everybody's looking, and I took class differently then than I do now. Now I'm almost in a private space with myself among a group of other people. And there are times when I let them in, and that's like the performance side, because I still love that in class. If we have two groups and my friend Lars or something is watching me do Grand Battements, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability for Lars. But it's not like that the whole time, and I get to choose when I let people into my space and when it's me in my own bubble mentally. So I do like both, but I prefer the group of people because he found my peaceful pocket even among a group of people. So I just find that I can use that as motivation as I go. So I'm in my space, but then if I'm starting to get tired or I'm facing a little bit of resistance with myself, I can let Russell into my space just with him existing in the room and say, oh, well, okay, I'm going to step up to the plate a little bit now.
Well, I'm not always great at paying attention in class. So for me, dancing with a lot of other people is helpful because then I can take my cues from everyone else in the room.
You can copy them. I remember.
That's not always true. I do pay attention a lot of times, but also like just kind of talking about the times when, where it's really just to warm up, and if it's a class where someone's giving something a little bit different, then I really rely on everyone else in the room to help me through the class.
Right.
Not like asking them.
So
what the
it's a
step is,
basic thing, actually, right?
Yeah.
Imitation.
Yeah.
Copying, imitation. This is like, we always think, oh, I'm copying, but actually it's the most essential thing in dance, right?
Yeah. And I like very rarely dance alone. And it's in the last couple years since I've been doing more of the kinds of pas de deux that you just saw that I've realized that it's really helpful for me to know what my partner's steps are before I would just know what I have to do and try and then dance that way. But now I'm trying to learn my partner's steps as well, because it's helpful to, it helps me find my place, and then it also helps me to be a better partner. But I think that I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
Yeah, but it strikes me also that you in class, from what I remember, which was a long time ago, you kind of are learning how to get around each other, right? It's not choreographed, but there's a certain, you're aware of each other's bodies, how much space between, how far away you could be, are you going to hit somebody?
Well, it is very choreographed when you're young. Mm-hmm. Like there's everyone's spaced, like at the beginning, the first combination, you're spaced out in your lines and you have your place and then you rotate through. And now we're kind of at a point where the pattern of class, the form of class is pretty automatic, and you know how much space to give someone. But yeah. But the working on, I feel like we've both had the opportunity to work on our own a lot before and probably sought that out. And I think that that's more for at the times when there's something more to figure out about beyond the steps, like interpretation, that's when the time alone helps more. It's not so much the
mechanics of it.
Yeah, for me, the mechanics, it's really helpful to have other people there for like when we learn new choreography.
Yeah, so talk about that. How do you actually learn new choreography?
Well,
what happens?
Well, for this pas de deux, I think it's the first time we did it together, Lauren had done it a lot before. So, and I don't have to do as much as she does in it. So a lot of it was me taking cues from what Lauren was doing. But like when a new choreographer comes in to set choreography on us, they'll either tell us just say the names of the steps, or they'll demonstrate, or we'll have someone else demonstrate. And then we just have to copy.
So you hear the words and you see what they're doing, and then you just do it. Is that it?
Well, yeah, we'll watch
then
from tapes.
And then how do you remember it? Because sometimes somebody throws at you, I know this, right? They can throw at you 20 steps at a time. And then you do it, and then...
Well, this is like sometimes when I'm in the room, there's some dancers in our company who are just so fast. Like they'll watch something once and then they can do it and they remember it. And I am not like that at all. So I like when I remember when Justin Peck was choreographing Rodeo, like Taylor Stanley to do it right away. And I had to like stand in the back and do it with every group like 20, 30 times in order to remember the steps. But some people don't have to do that.
Well, this is what I find interesting about choreography. We have vocabulary, so that's a shortcut for us. It's like having a dictionary. It's like, okay, well, I know what an arabesque is. So if somebody tells me to do an arabesque in a little bit of a different way, I already have the base understanding that this is what an arabesque is, and then we can change it from there. That's easier. A lot of dancers that have modern, contemporary training, tap even, the more knowledge you gain, you have more vocabulary, more in your pocket. And those people, like Taylor Stanley, has tons of. He's well versed in a lot of disciplines. He picks up things very fast. I've also worked with choreographers that don't necessarily use language. Yeah, they use sound effects or visual cues. You know, you're like a banana in this part, and I'm like, okay, banana step. Like, okay. And your brain...
It's not connected to a step that you've learned in a classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
just
then,
movement.
Just movement. And then sometimes it's just, feeling, like a human feeling. Like, oh, this is when you're tired. And then, do I have to think my spine is contracting back and now the ribs are going? And that would take forever. Mentally. So I think as dancers, you're creating shortcuts all the time. Ballet dancers, I find we have a little bit of a harder time going into other areas of dance for that reason, because we're so used to having this vocabulary that's like pliés, tendus, dégages. We have all of our steps. And then somebody comes in and they break all of the boundaries. They go banana. And then, as a dancer, you have to be able to find a new way to download that movement into your body. So it's really interesting. I'm so fascinated by that. I wouldn't consider myself a fast learner, but I am very aware of what's happening when a choreographer comes in my body.
I think that's a good segue straight into Rafa, who's going to tell us how that all works. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so this was absolutely fascinating. So I'm Rafa Juste. I'm a neuroscientist at Columbia, but I'm particularly proud that many years ago I spent a lot of time in these halls as a student in the extension division in composition, and I remember fondly the mixture of rigor and creativity that I picked up here that helped me through my career. So I don't think it's such a bad idea to have people that are going into science take classes at Juilliard. I think it's at the heart of it. It's a lot of what we're trying to do in our research is not that unlike what what composers, I was doing composition, but musicians or dancers are doing here. So this is a plug for Damien. And I should also say, as a plug for Russell's and Lincoln Center, that I came from abroad, and part of the reason I stayed in New York here was precisely because of the beacon of art and culture that Lincoln Center represents. So this is unique in the world, and it's not the key reason I stayed here. There was also some personal reasons, but it definitely was part of the equation. Anyway, so I'm. After what you've heard from Tom, I think you're probably an experts in understanding how the brain controls movement, and you will probably pass an undergraduate test on that subject right now. So I'm going to try to go into the topic of which is directly related to what you heard us. How does the brain learn? How does dancers like what we just saw, how do they learn to make a movement, and how do they learn a choreography? How does the brain learn a pattern? And I have to tell you, as a full disclosure, that in neuroscience today, we still don't have a general theory of how the brain works. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you about are speculations. We're going into uncharted territories. Compared to what you've heard from Tom, which is much more solid knowledge. So just put all these comments with in quotation marks. So how does the brain learn? Well, so essentially inside your skull, inside your brain or your spinal cord, there's only neurons and the connection between neurons. So you want to put something new inside your brain, like some knowledge, something you've learned, well, you have to either change the neurons or change the connections. No? There's nothing else you're going to be changing there. And we believe as scientists that something physically is changing in your brain as you learn. And there's two hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that maybe you put in new neurons in there. So you generate new neurons, and those are the ones that are learning the new step. Well, that hypothesis, except for some exceptions, and actually we have Eric Yevis here from Rockefeller, who's an expert on bird songs, and in some birds generate new neurons that probably are related to new learning, and there's some parts of our brain that also generate new neurons. But essentially, most of our brain, the neurons that you have are the ones you were born with. And there's no new neurons. And that means that all the learning that goes on is not probably due to new neurons, but to these changes in the connections. And connections are these synapses that you may have heard about that essentially activate neurons. And they synapse from one neuron to another neuron, make that neuron become more active. So these connections are probably getting stronger. It'll be like a muscle that when you flex it gets bigger. Well, the idea is that when you learn something, connections between neurons get stronger. And this goes back to an idea of Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb, who imagined that what happens during learning is that these connections get stronger if the two neurons fire together, if they're activated together. So I came up with this little sentence that neurons that fire together wire together. So if you are two neurons and you're firing at the same time and you have a little feeble connection, that connection gets stronger. Or maybe you get a new connection that wasn't there before. So why is this interesting? Well, imagine you want to learn association between two things. So the classical example is Pavlov's dog, that you show the dog some food, the dog salivates, to show the food with the bell ringing, and after a few repetitions, you ring the bell alone, and the dog salivates. So he's learned to associate that the bell means food. And a lot of our learning, including a lot of the learning that we've seen in ballet, is association. So with this very simple rule of Hebb, neurons that fire together work together, you can explain a lot of learning, because by repeating two things either one after the other, shortly after the other, or together, after a few repetitions, there's probably some changes in your neural circuits that strengthen those connections. And then when you activate one, you activate the other. So this could explain the basis of a lot of the learning that goes on in humans and animals. And this would explain, again, how two things can be associated in your head. And these two things, if they come one after the other, guess what? It's what we call cause and effect. Okay, so just armed with these very simple rules that these neurons are doing, your brain can go through the world and figure out what's causing what, because you can essentially learn from the world all these relations. So it's quite a beautiful, elegant way of essentially getting the logic of the world. But let's go back to dancing. So now you've learned how they may be able to, Lauren and Russell may be able to learn a new step. No, they essentially neurons that fire together wire together. That means that they have to repeat it. So this how you get to Carnegie Hall. Well, it's all practice. They know that. They say that they have to repeat 20 times sometimes in order to learn, and that's probably because you're essentially making this connection stronger. But let's talk about the next step. Well, how do they learn a choreography? Okay, so it's one thing to learn one step, another thing is to learn a whole choreography that can last half an hour. No? Well, that's a little bit more complicated. Well, it turns out that Hebb also, in the same book where he proposed these ideas, he said, okay, wait a minute. If neurons are connected through the synapses, and if the synapses get stronger if they fire together, well, guess what? If many neurons are doing that, they're going to get grouped together, and they start behaving as a group. Okay? And these neurons are going to auto-stimulate each other to the point that they don't need anything from the outside world to turn them on. So he predicted that we would have these groups of neurons in our heads that would be essentially spontaneously active. They would auto turn on and keep on. And the reason this is important is because what could be going on what's likely going on with in nature with the nervous system is that nature has learned how to build these states of activity that are spontaneous, that are independent of the world. So this is not a reflex. You can have a group of neurons that are turning on, regardless of whether it's been stimulated or not to happen. And why is that important? Because if you think about it, what nature is building, it's building a virtual world of states in our heads, okay, that they could represent things about the real world, but they have their own activity. They don't need to be turned on by the real world. We can turn them on in our heads internally. In other words, we can have a model of the world in our heads. And this is just an outcome of this Hebbian rule of having neurons that fire together, wire together. So groups of neurons are going to get turned on, and then they can keep on even if the stimulus, even if that bell stops ringing, the dog could still think of that bell. Okay, so this is the second famous postulate of Hebb, and predicts again the existence of these groups of neurons that are independently, and moreover, and this is where it gets into choreography, he predicted that these independent groups of neurons could hook up one after the other and form a chain. Okay, so you can not only have ideas of the world that are popping in your head, you can actually thread them all together, one after the other, again, by these simple rules of synaptic plasticity, in which neurons that are firing together are wired together. And that's where you get choreography, because, as you've heard, they can have the ideas, the vocabulary, as Lauren beautifully put it, of steps in their heads, and these things are independent of the world. You don't have to do the step to think of the step. No? And then you can actually thread them all together into what could be a choreography. No? And how does this threading occur? Through practice, repetition, cause and effect. In this case, the cause and effect is, instead of being one neuron and another neuron, is one group of neurons with another group of neurons. And you can stretch that for a long time. So this not only would explain the choreography in dancing, it would explain music, it would explain a lot of what we do in our behavior. No? So these chains of neurons that are activated, forming a pattern, they also have a very important property that was also highlighted by many people. And that's something that we call pattern completion. So what do I mean by pattern completion? That means that if you want to trigger the whole chain, you don't have to stimulate every step. You just have to stimulate the beginning. And then the system is automatic. Because the way these neurons are connected, they cannot help but essentially activate the next set of neurons and the next set of neurons and the next set of neurons. So that makes the difficulty of complicated choreography or complicated behavior disappear in smoke, because you don't have to think of every step. You just have to think of the beginning. And then it's essentially the brain has been wired already so that this whole change happens. So, and this relates also to the ideas that Tom was saying about predicting the future. So I'm telling you that evolution may have designed in our brains some sort of virtual reality machine in which we have a model of the world that we're essentially running all the time. Whether we're awake or asleep, we're always running that model. When we're awake, that model relates to the outside world because the senses make us link our model to the world. But when we're asleep, as you know, that model is disconnected from the world, so you can have all kinds of crazy dreams. No? So this model is, in a way, you can look at this model as a way to predict the future. And let me also honestly tell you that we still don't know what the brain actually does. If you ask this to a question in scientist, it's not clear. You'll get the same answer from many people. But there's one idea that is now very popular, and this is essentially a future predictor. No? That what we call intelligence, the brains have intelligence because they enable animals to predict the future. And if they can predict the future, they can behave in a way which is more successful. We can pass the genes and reproduce. So it's possible that this whole thing is just a future prediction machine by building these states in our heads that we can thread into these chains to be able to guess what's going to happen. And that's why we contract that muscle when we know we have to move the arm. So I just want to finish also touching on this issue of imitation. So why is it easier to learn choreography if you're dancing with a group or a partner as opposed to alone? Well, it turns out that these groups of neurons that are turning on in your heads, that you can call them ideas, you can call them representations, they also refer not just to different things in the world, but also to the states of other people. And in other words, you could watch someone cry, okay, and there are neurons in your brain that are responsible for crying that would fire as if you're the one who's crying. So these neurons were discovered recently. They're called mirror neurons. So it turns out in our brains, in humans and primates, we have neurons that echo what we see in other people. So they form the basis, we think, of imitation. So when you're trying to imitate someone, you're literally using the same neurons in your brain that would move your body when you watch someone dance. Or this is also the basis of empathy. No? When you feel someone's pain, you're literally feeling this people's pain, this person's pain, because it's the same circuits are getting activated inside you. So it's likely that the reason why dancers are most successful practicing or learning the choreography in a group is because they're using these mirror neurons to activate their own circuits. They get tripped by the outside world. So just to wrap up, so now you've learned about how learning could occur in the brain, how you can create the mental idea of something in your head, how you could string together these ideas, no? And how you could also trip this internal circuit, not just by imagination, which also would be an excellent way to train by just thinking about it, because you're activating these groups, but also by imitation, because then you're actually activating all these mirror neurons. So with this knowledge, I wanted to ask Lauren and Russell to dance again, the beautiful Wilden piece and Ligeti. And then I'd like you to look at their dancing with all this mental structure that we've given you between Tom and I, so that now you can not only appreciate the beauty of the dancing, but something which is also incredible, which is the spectacularly amazing beauty of the brain that is generating this dancing.
To Lauren and Russell, and what most people here don't know is they did just get off a plane from Shanghai. That is an added element to your brilliance, so thank you so much for being here and sharing your art. We are on a break, so we will come back in about 10-15 minutes. Thank you all for being here, and we will return shortly.
Okay, so we come now to the third and final part of our program, where we're going to talk with the Mark Morris Dance for PD program about Parkinson's disease and their experience working with dance. To introduce this part of the program, we're going to watch a brief, I think it's 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5 or 6, cut from a film. And then after that, we're going to have dancers from the Dance for PD sitting here, and they're going to perform excerpts with choreography by Mark Morris. And after that, Rafa's going to come back and talk with them about what they do, how they do it, and what we can learn from it. So, I don't know, there it is. Turn your attention to the video. Thank you.
They've each had something go missing: steadiness of hand or sureness of step, the once confident stride or arms that swing. Parkinson's claims them one by one, even sometimes the ability to smile. They've each had something go missing, but the dream to move freely never goes away.
And a 5, a 6, a 7, here we go, and. Really emphasizing your plie here, so you're kind of staying low. Changing the arms, point. Hey, you!
It's a moment to shine, for a Parkinson's patient to shine, is to show what we can do, and to say, here I am.
Keep it coming,
There's a joy that I get from moving around. This is an opportunity to dance, and I like to dance. To be able to fly in an organized pattern.
Good. Let's transition into rehearsal. I believe
dance gives people an opportunity to experience what it's like to move with grace and to move with power and to move with passion.
You can do things that you didn't think you could do. And once you relax and let the body take over, it will go.
The dancing part of this isn't a miracle, and it's not a treatment, but I also see this amazing thing of the people who come into the building one way and leave another way. And I don't mean by a different door, I mean that they've been transformed in a certain way.
It's liberated a part of me, a sense of creativity. When the dance class is going on, there are no patients, they're dancers.
Again. Okay, so now I'm going to welcome the dancers from the Dance for PD program.
So I was fascinated and struck by this, and I'm curious about how did this all start? How long have you been doing this? What are your experiences? And maybe if we can start by someone speaking about the program in general, and then we can go into getting the feedback of individual people. Yeah.
I'll start with that. The program started in 2001 when the Mark Morris Dance Group moved into our current residence in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. But the idea actually for this class came to us from a woman by the name of Oli Westheimer, and she ran and was the executive director of the Brooklyn Parkinson Group. And she was a dancer by training growing up, had kind of a serious dance background, I think ballet mostly. And her husband is a neurologist. So she started to overhear conversations at the support group about how strategies of people living with PD would move or get up or imagery or things that they used. And then she started to think about dance strategies and dance methods. And they all started to kind of sound familiar to her. Maybe even like spotting, dancers focus on one and turn their head, whip it around so they don't get dizzy. And her neurologist husband would say, yeah, that's this happening. And so she started to put the two together, that dancers are sort of movement experts, and the strategies that they use every day could help people with PD also move and dance. So she came to us, the Mark Morris Dance Group, when we moved in. She had the idea several years before, but I think she was waiting for the right company to move in, and we moved in, and she just knocked on our door and said, here's this idea, would you start a class? And we said yes, and she told us two things. One is the class should probably start seated, and two, probably don't do anything where your head is down so you don't get dizzy. And that was basically it. And it really was about an artistic experience and not therapy at all. And it was just, that's how it started. And it's grown from class that was maybe once a month with maybe 3 people to, we have over 300 classes all over the world modeled after our class. We teach in every borough of New York City for free. And we now train other dancers and communities to bring Dance for PD to their community. And it can be any type of dance. There's one in India, doing Indian dance. So it's just, the model is now spread around the world.
I have a different take on that question. In the beginning, there was disorder, or what the Greeks call chaos. So that was the beginning. But as an antidote to disorder, a movement disorder, there is order, which is cosmos. So sometimes we refer to our program as cosmos, which puts order to our lives as one of the participants in the movie said, when we are dancing, we are not patient. We're transformed into a different world, which is the world of order or cosmos.
In fact, when you're dancing, I cannot tell you that you have any movement disorder. You're so graceful. And I was wondering, did you train a lot? Do you practice every day? How often do you come to class? For how long have you been doing this?
I joined the group in 2013 when this piece was being rehearsed, actually. They had started working on this particular piece that we presented today. And I absolutely don't have Parkinson's when I'm dancing, and I don't know why. But I use it as a strategy now. If I get stuck, when I'm just like walking down the street, I just start singing a marching song, and I go marching off like anybody else. So it's brilliant, really.
So this is a question for you. Do you always, is the music critical? The music's
critical for me. I know some people count them. Everyone has a little bit different strategy, but I think for a lot of people, music is a universal language. And music has rhythm, and that's what we don't have. We don't have any, we are very episodic in the way we move. And we don't move to the music unless we really, set about to do that. So, yeah, I think the music's critical.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Parkinson's disease is a neurodegenerative disease. There's a part of the brain, the substantia nigra, that loses the ability to synthesize and secrete dopamine, which is an important neurotransmitter, and it affects a lot of people. Jennifer was just telling me that more than 10 million people in the world have Parkinson. The typical symptoms are rigidity and tremor. But as you have seen with your own eyes, here you have a Parkinson patient dancing without any rigidity and tremor. So that's what struck me. I mean, I have been blown away by this performance, and I couldn't help pulling out my professional hat and thinking about pattern completion. That maybe that's what they're learning in these classes, is to thread these states and reinforce this pattern completion, so that once you're in the groove, so to speak, then the system becomes more automatic and internally built, so you're less prone to the tremor and the rigidity. So let me ask also one of the patients. Do you feel that this dance therapy spills over your normal life? Does it help you to cope with the problems that you may have when you're moving around, or when you're trying to do things, or when you're at home?
Well, I don't like the word patient, because it's very passive, so to speak. But Parkinson has been good to me, and I celebrate the day I was diagnosed as my second birthday, because that has transformed my life. Instead of seeking what was wrong with me, I embarked on a path to seek what matters to me. And so about 5 years into this exploration, when I turned 65, I did two things. One was to apply for a reduced fare Metro card.
First things first.
I deserved it. And the other thing was I enrolled for a master's class at CUNY in disability studies. So Parkinson has transformed my life.
I think this program, it goes beyond exactly what's taught in the class. Although the whole, I don't know, when you guys walk around Mark Morris, I'm sure you feel it the way we do. There is just a spirit of can-do and acceptance and excitement about life and excitement about movement and excitement about choreography, and the possibility is there. And that resonates through all of the activities there and among all of the people who attend activities there. So we we really don't view ourselves as trying to deal with lemons. We deal with lemonade. And that is a way just of really just looking at the possibilities, at what needs to be removed so that we can get people to the class if they can't get there. There's enough time between classes to socialize, and they've been set up in a way that they happen one after the other, so you are already there for most of them. So it's been very well thought through from the perspective of the people who built the program. I thank you very much.
And I would like to interject, actually. So Manny doesn't like the word patient, and we don't like the word therapy. This is not dance therapy in our eyes as instructors. It's a dance class. We just started seated in a chair. We move to standing, and then we end up locomoting around the room. So it's dance. We are making up dance combinations. And the therapeutic effect is I think, a benefit, but not the main goal.
I apologize. I think I should know better because we actually also try to avoid the use patient in our work, and we refer to human subjects because it's essentially to avoid any potential connotation of the term. And it's also, if you use the term patient, you define what's normal. And it's not 100% clear what's normal because we're all very different in many respects. So take my apologies. So just a question also to what you were referring to, both of you, about the fact that you do this in a group and how important is this emotional context of working in a group. And again, I cannot help think of the mirror neurons that are lighting up in the brains of these subjects and how they're also transmitting and picking up empathy. So both a question for the teachers of the class and the students of the class. Do you think it's important to have a group and emotional connection?
Yes. Yes, it is. It's very important. I mean, a lot of the materials, as you know, from this program are available online. And sometimes when I can't make it, I do put on the one of the CDs.
And what is your experience when you're trying to do it by yourself?
And my experience is this is really boring. And it's no different than in fact, I'm in most of the videos, so it's like I was there when they were done. It's not the quality of the video, it's that you're not doing it with anybody else, so you can't really kind of celebrate with them.
This is a perfect plug-in for institutions of education like Juilliard, universities, schools, where maybe there's this emotional human aspect of learning that, as we're watching here, and we heard it also from the comments from Lauren and Russell, it's a critical one.
If I could just add to that, I took over from Oli. I took over the Brooklyn Parkinson's group when she retired. And one of the programs that we run, which is not a dance program, it's a fitness program, but it's a collaboration with LIU, so that they hold our class as a class for whom students get credit, for which they get credit. And they intern in the program and get to see how we react to the different kinds of exercises and programs and things that are going on in that class. So they have a real hands-on experience with, one disease in any event. And it's so, we get a free class, they get credit, and, Long Island gets a big, check off that they're doing their bit for the community. And it really, so again, yeah, I think that marriage of institutions of learning and what we're trying to do here is really important.
So any comments from the teachers in terms of is there a right class size? Is there, do you notice this more intangible, emotional feeling in the class making a difference? Is that really your experience as well?
Yeah, I would definitely, going on the note of community, the community aspect of it is incredibly important. And if you walk into our Brooklyn class, which is our flagship class at Mark Morris, you will be overwhelmed with that sense. It's a very welcoming group. Many of them have been there for years and years and have started doing things outside of class together, going to shows, going to movies, going to fitness class, things that we don't run, but they met each other through dance, and they go out, and sometimes they'll come in and say, I didn't really feel like coming today, but I got a call from Cindy, and she said she was going to come pick me up, so I'm here. And it's really wonderful to see that, especially since Parkinson's can be very isolating. And so this sense of community and bringing people together really helps break through that.
And the class is also open to caretakers and spouses of the people with PD. So also you can come as a guest, and if you're in the room, we essentially make you take the class with us.
There is no watching in class. You're not allowed to be on the sidelines. You are in it.
Okay, so now again, as a professional trained as an MD, how about other disorders? Have you thought about expanding into other problems that may be movement disorders, or even actually memory disorders, which in my mind could benefit also equally well from some of these exercises that could enhance, for instance, pattern completion or synaptic plasticity. Have you thought about that? I mean, I'm not trying to get every dancer in the world a job here. But
we have thought about it. We do get some offers, or not offers, or people wanting us to do that. And then maybe the suggestion that we could combine them in class, but it doesn't really work and for us, and we're a staff of 3. And to be honest, it's just a human resource problem for us to expand. And, we're just touching the surface, I feel like, of what we can do with this program, Dance for PD, even though I just said it's in 200, 300 communities, that's just a small fraction of where we want it to be. But yes, it's come up, but we just haven't been able to tackle that yet.
So I danced with the Mark Morris Dance Group for 15 years, and in touring with them would do outreach for people with other disabilities, mental disabilities, and I used this class model, actually.
And what is your experience with other disabilities?
Well, I have to say that everyone is very much into it, but I feel like we've really honed in on what works for people with PD. And so also I would only teach one-off classes, so everyone was very enthusiastic, but I couldn't see like a long-term result in that scenario.
Well, anyway, my kudos to you. This is absolutely spectacular, and for your spirit and determination to get this off the ground. But again, this also points the way to maybe a future, not just growth in PD, but maybe benefiting other subjects that maybe that suffer other disabilities. Could be a good model to follow, and tapping into these internal brain mechanisms that somehow you've been able to tap, even though we don't even know how they work, but something it's obviously working here, no?
Yeah, and we're definitely doing that in Brooklyn. We have a very inclusive school, kids, adults, special needs, all, but it's not as, I guess, maybe public facing because it's not spread, but we do offer many classes in Brooklyn.
So sorry, you were going to make a comment.
Well, there have been about 30 plus researches done on dance and PD. So I'm sure from within that literature, there could be transferable skills. But as for me personally, having had Parkinson's and dealing with it, I could then transfer that skill, so to speak, that I acquired from dealing with it and apply it to other aspects of my life. Actually, I think it has, like I said, transformed me, and I've become this different person. Early on in the when I first started about 10 years ago, we were going to discussing participation in the Unity Walk, which Ken Eiderman here is very instrumental in putting together. And we had a T-shirt, but on the back of the T-shirt was a blank piece of cloth begging for a message. And actually the message came to me in a dream, and it was in French. The message was, "Je danse donc je suis. Instead of I think, therefore I am, it says I dance, therefore I am. Because for us, being at Mark Morris has transformed our lives and has changed our being.
So with this beautiful quote, I think I wanted to thank all of you for And now for the final part of the program, we're going to have an open Q&A with all of you. And if I could ask the panelists to come and take over.
Thank you. Sorry, just can I have the mic? We have some time, and so during the break, a number of people came up to me and said, "Are we going to have time to ask questions?" Yes, but not yet. We have a little bit of time, and as we heard Rafa say earlier, we are joined here today by another former dancer and now neuroscientist, Eric Jarvis from Rockefeller, and he has kindly agreed to share with us his work that he's been doing, and I had the good fortune to visit his lab recently, and it really is extraordinary and ties in beautifully with today. So please help me welcome Eric Jarvis, and we'll be back with questions in a minute.
I promise to be brief because I have questions too. But yes, first I want to thank the organizers for organizing this event. For me personally, it's been a really great event to attend because, as you just heard, I do have a former and actually a current life kind of as a dancer. I started out with the Joffrey Ballet School, and I was on scholarship there at Albanelli School, as well as went to the High School of Performing Arts. And then I transitioned to becoming a scientist when I went to college, but I still dance all along that time. And now I'm doing salsa dancing as opposed to ballet or jazz. And I'll be performing next Saturday, coming up, that is, at a place called Salsa Mania. So, and I want to say recently in my work, my life as a former dancer, my life now as a scientist have come full circle. Because what I study is the brain mechanisms for spoken language, what we're doing now. And I use animal models to do that have that ability close to what we do, like parrots and songbirds. Many people know that parrots have the ability to imitate sounds. You heard about imitation earlier today. The sounds that they hear, they can produce. Well, as most people know, this is a very rare ability. Your dog doesn't talk back to you, neither does your cat or non-human primates, other monkeys. So it's a pretty rare trait. And what my lab and others' labs have found is that the brain pathways that control this ability to imitate sounds evolved in a similar or parallel convergent way in us and these birds and other species that have this ability. And that's very interesting that you can, like the evolution of wings in birds and bats, they occurred in a similar way, using the upper arms to put the wings. Then a recent discovery, well, not so recent now, about 10 years ago, but no one knew the neural mechanisms. It was discovered that only those species that can learn how to imitate sounds are also the ones that can learn how to dance, all right? Who can synchronize their body movements to sounds that they hear. So a human or a parrot, an elephant's another vocal learner, or a dolphin, right? You can teach them to move their body rhythmically, the whole body, to the downbeat, for example, of human music. You try to get a dog to do that, or a monkey, or a chimpanzee to do that, they can't. They'll respond by jumping around to music, but they can't synchronize the body movements to the sound. Around that same time the discovery was made, we found that the brain regions that are controlling learned movements directly surround the brain regions that control learned speech. All right? And the brain regions that were being active when these parrots were doing kind of dance movements were directly adjacent and in a parallel circuit in the whole brain that controls learning how to produce imitated sounds from these parrots. So what that led us to conclude, or at least hypothesize, is that the brain regions that control learning how to speak evolved out of a motor circuit that controls learning how to do all kinds of movements. Once that happened, okay, and to learn how to speak, to move these muscles here, the most rapidly firing muscles in the entire body, you need to integrate the sounds that you hear with your muscle movements. You need a very tight integration between those two sensory and motor outputs. We think that tight integration for speech contaminated the rest of the brain for movements in parrots and humans. And with that contamination of sound going to the other muscle groups, that then allowed us to learn how to dance. So this is what we're trying to test now. Can we take the genes that control the ability to learn how to produce sound, the ability to synchronize body movements to sound, all right? And let's say put them in a mouse, okay? And get a mouse to learn how to imitate not only vocalizations, but body movements and to sound. And I'm serious, this is what we're trying. So, so for that reason, I would say now, it's come full circle to me, where my passion to study how the brain controls imitation has now led me to just trying to understand how the brain controls dance. And I'll stop there. I'll say with these two, Raphael and I were overlapped together at Rockefeller. It's good to see you, and he's put some work of ours in your book. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Eric. I don't know about you, but next time I'm at Salsa Mania, I'm going to be going, I wonder how many people up there are neuroscientists. That's fascinating. So this is the opportunity now to think about your questions. I'm going to ask that the panelists from today please come up, have a seat with a mic, and then I'll open it up. So as we are convening people up here, if you could be thinking about your questions, I'll get you in just a moment. But please, if the panelists could all come up. Lauren? Jennifer. Okay, you're close. All right. Okay, good. All right, thank you all. So questions from the group. I know a number of you came up to me and said, and then I said, hold your questions. Yes.
Two dancers, Russell and Lauren. So you sat through all of this today. Does hearing this change anything about the mechanism of your dance, of the way you think about what you do, or the way you learn what you do? Or does this all sort of is an interesting side note to how you really go about it?
Yeah, it's just redefining what my body already knows. It's putting it in a way that my brain can understand. Because I think, we learn things even as children that you just involuntarily do. And it's nice to know how it's happening. Yeah, like how we're learning things, how we're going about that. I was really interested in the Parkinson's whole demonstration side. Because to us, we have... personally, I take for granted the fact that I can move pretty freely. And how would that feel if one of those things were taken away? And I feel so much gratitude in what I do anyways. I love the fact that I'm a ballerina and that's my profession. I consider myself so lucky. So that the pathway and how music connects those things, that's, I think, what I was the most interested in today. How music can then make you do something that you couldn't do before. And we reach new heights all the time, but anyone can reach those heights. So I think that's cool.
I definitely felt like I was thinking about I had a different awareness the second time we did the dance. But nothing that specific, but I was, I felt a different half of my body where I was, when I did something with my left hand, I felt something else. But I did the dance for PD training program a little over a year ago, and I think that one thing that was really the most amazing part of it is when you get to be in the class with everyone, and it's I think that what's interesting about this day is that it's all about how I feel like there's something about dance that is really evident in the dancer PD classes that's about this connection, which I think seems like it's kind of hard to articulate at this point in terms of what brains are doing, but so much of the class is about looking other people in the eyes, and it really is that social element. And I'm sorry, Shanghai yesterday, I totally lost my train of thought.
I wish I was that inarticulate, I'll tell you that.
But I think that I do think that there's, a lot of what Lauren and I are doing is really just, some social movement in a lot of ways.
As you were discussing how you train, it was uncanny how everything you were saying fit perfectly well with the types of ideas that we're trying to explore in terms of brain mechanisms. And let's say that this is the way things work, then I could imagine how there may be positive influence that neuroscience could have in dance in terms of maybe ways to train that could be different somehow, and also a way in which dance could have a positive influence not just in neuroscience by helping us understand how brain works, because as the title of the program says, the brain is really the dancer, but also help understand some of these disabilities that come with malfunction of brain circuits, and that could also be very important.
One thing I'm just going to add, an afterthought, but when I watched our colleagues, some in the back, some next to me, dance, just the last one, I saw more than dancers. I saw joy. I saw celebration. That's hard to capture. You, my friend, have changed my life today, just the way I think about it. So we are in your debt. You're doing us a favor, allowing us to get to know you.
When two great dancers work together, it's not a mathematical replication of a series of steps. It's always a subject of interpretation. What struck me when, Tom, when you and Raphael were talking about the way that learning takes place, I hadn't heard anything about how creativity takes place. And given the emphasis on brain structure, I was curious how that gets translated from that mathematical replication, which we did not see today. We saw artistry. That's a creative process. How does the creative process take place in the brain?
It's a fascinating question. We don't understand how creativity is generated by the brain, but there's a couple of ideas out there. One, which is true, is that all these brain circuits that I'm talking about, they're actually stochastic. So what do I mean by stochastic? That sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. If you have a machine like the elevator, it's not stochastic. You press the button and you better go up to that floor. No? But the brain is a stochastic machine. So that means that if you do something, not all the time you get the output. And people don't understand why the hell evolution builds brains, which is the culmen of all evolution, to control our behavior and make that machine stochastic. And one possibility has to do with creativity, that maybe if you have a machine that is stochastic, that has variability in its output, you can use it to explore the world and go into new areas, either mentally or physically, where you've never been before. And that's critical for evolution, because that's how you change. That's how you can learn new things. Otherwise, you would only learn old things. So this is just one hypothesis that could underlie the creativity, that everything you've heard us talk about, at the end of the day, it's actually, it's not A gives rise to B, but A sometimes gives rise to B, sometimes it gives rise to something else.
Another dimension to that I'll riff on a little bit, beautiful answer, is that the brain has circuits. Rafi's talked about them, I've talked about them, and they work as networks. Rafi's also called them cell assemblies, but there's networks. Turns out there's one network that was discovered in the last 10 years, nobody knew about, which comes online, and it's called the default mode network, and it comes online when you're daydreaming. Right now it's not, I'm looking in the eye, we're talking, it ain't working. But if you stare out the window, or if you meditate, or if you sort of get out of that intense connection to the other state, that network comes online. So you're never idle. It's not that you, one brain turns off and you sleep. You're always working. But let me tell you what, just 2 more minutes because it's so cool. The default mode network was discovered by Marcus Rego in WashU and some other cool guys, guy up at Harvard. But what does it do? And now I'm going to take a little sidebar. I don't know that anybody have heard of an art historian named Rego, or his pupil was a guy named Gombrich. And they introduced something called the beholder's share. So when you look at a painting, a Matisse, 2 things happen. This is not me, this is the beholder's share, Rego's idea. When you look at a painting, first you're a collaborator with Matisse, because he know and you know the rules. He may not know the formal rules the way we might in brain science, or Eric might in birdsong, but he knows that if it's smaller, it's likely farther away. He knows when you put, my wife's an artist, when you put colors together, you don't see what you think. Modran, okay. So that's the rule, you're a collaborator. But there's another dimension to that. Here's where the default mode network comes in. The other dimension to that experience is your private, personal, emotional connection. You and your wife saw Auric Givani. You and your wife saw that painting for the first time. Your daughter brought her home from school. So, and only you in this room have that. And that's the beholder share. Turns out that when that happens, the default mode network comes on board. So there's networks in the brain to get us around the world and help you out with breakfast. But there's a lot of other networks that can be hijacked, as Rafi so beautifully said, in the service of creativity, in the service of imagination. So the next time your kid stares out the window, don't get mad at them.
In terms of creativity, there is discussion among the PD community in terms of the observation that people with PD become more creative. I don't know whether studies have been done on this, but our group also evidences some of this, and we do some theater work, some artwork. People write poetry or write other things. So perhaps this is something that we should seek funding for, or research funds, in order, again, to explore the connection between a broken body, so to speak, and creativity.
Well, you certainly have, in the dance class that I was a part of, you certainly had far more creative ways of completing the tasks that were set by the teachers than ballet dancers do generally. Like there was the way, I just remember there's this part in the class where everyone creates a chain, and the way that people created a chain in the dance for PD class was much more interesting than how ballet dancers would have created a chain.
Well, yes, now that you invited me up here, I can answer the question. I'm going to do a hand-waving sort of hypothesis about explaining that. One belief out there is that if brain pathways connected to dance are somehow inherited from brain pathways for speech, what's selected for creativity and speaking? Some people think it's sexual selection. So meaning that the more you vary the sounds that you produce, the more that you can imitate, the smarter you sound, the smarter you seem to be, and the more you are paid attention to. Okay? And that, after you select for that ability to have what we call brain plasticity, and the speech circuits have a lot of plasticity in them, where these connections that Rafi talked about change a lot. Maybe one idea or one possibility here is that our ability to have a lot of creativity in dance could have been inherited from the ability to produce lots of very different sounds.
So thank you all very much. This has been really a great afternoon. This is a question for Eric, just a question on brain morphology. So one of the interesting hallmarks of the human brain is that when you look at the evolution of its size and its morphology over time to our present state, not only has it sort of doubled or tripled in size, but the actual morphology of the brain has changed as well. So when you look at songbirds, do you see a change in the brain morphology or the brain size relative to the body weight for these imitating birds or these songbirds relative to ones that aren't?
Yeah, what's interesting about that, a recent discovery by Tecumseh Fitch, a colleague of mine, shows that in songbirds or in the vocal learning birds, not the chickens, but the parrots and the songbirds, right? Instead of increasing the brain size, there is an increase in brain size, but not as a big an increase relative to the body as in humans. Instead of increasing the brain size, they doubled the number of neurons and packed them into smaller space. One idea behind that is in order to evolve this new circuitry that we just heard about, that's controlling the voice and maybe ability to learn how to dance in them, right? Is that you're increasing the number of neurons but bringing them closer together so you don't have to have a big head.
Just one quick riff on that because it was discovered where Eric is now at the Rockefeller. But remember Rafi earlier said, do you make new neurons? Turns out this is a big debate in our field. One of my buddies at Yale was dug in, no, when you're a grown-up, adult, mammalian brain, there's no new neurons. It's wrong. There are new neurons. But that was discovered in, the first discovery that was credible was actually in canaries at the Rockefeller with Fernando Notenbaum and John Patton, who found that when birds learn new songs, new neurons came online. And the way they found it was Herculean. We could do it easily now, but back in the day they did it. And so Eric's system has informed not only speech and the kinds of things that inform speech. For example, birds and infants both go through babbling. In birds, it's called subsong, but we've all had kids, ba, 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 da, da, da. Birds do it too. In fact, little sidebar that I just love, if you know anybody that is a signer, they're deaf and their kids are deaf, they babble with their hands. It's a function not of language, of speech. The articulate, it's a function of language. So as a fundamental rudimentary element in babbling is just part of the game. And the manual babbler is babbler. And they only babble in the speech context, but they babble with their hands. Laura Petito found that up so Eric is being modest, but the fact is that the birdsong system has informed depression. I could tell you that story, but I don't want to hog the mic, but where you are at Columbia, it's informed treatments for depression. So part of, I guess as a basic science plug is, we should not be anthropocentric. That animal evolution is, she never throws anything away. Mother Nature's too damn smart. So these tricks that evolution has given us give us clues to the way our daily lives work.
We have a question there in the front.
All right, so I was thinking about dancing birds, like that's different, than mockingbirds and the other. So that's a different part of but it's the same dance usually.
Yes.
Did they change their dance?
So when you say dancing birds, you mean the ones I was describing earlier, or are you thinking of something
no,
else?
I mean like cranes and blue-footed birds.
Yeah, so a lot
they don't change their
a lot of
dance.
animals, from birds to monkeys to insects and so forth, go through these courtship dances where one sex or the other or both duet and so forth and do all these fantastic movements, body movements that us dancers sometimes even imitate in our choreography. But they're not doing it to music. All right, so the crane is not doing it to music. What's different about us humans, about what we just saw earlier today, what the great things that you both have done, is that they're actually synchronizing their body movements to the sounds heard. And that's what's different about us and some other species like parrots and dolphins.
I would just like to argue that dance can't happen without music, and that my husband is a musician.
It can happen without, you said?
Dance happens without music. So that if birds change their movements, why would that not be a dance?
So that's why I said synchronized to the sounds, because...
Are you saying a dance is only synchronized to sounds?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
no,
so I'm
no,
trying to
no,
understand
no,
this.
no.
Okay.
But for human experience, like there are many African cultures where there's not even a difference between music and dance.
Exactly.
They're the same word. And I think that's just because of our evolutionary past. The two are linked together. Whereas for the crane, they're not. The crane will do a lot of synchronized body movements without hearing the sounds.
Okay, I'm going to have to think about that one because I'm going to have to think about
Actually,
that.
following up a question for our two dancers, do you guys, can you imagine in your head your choreography without music?
I like to create choreography, and that's a very difficult thing for me. to do, because to me they are so married.
And I heard you just choreographed this piece. We saw it, right?
No, no, that would be great.
But we're also in a dance tradition that is very tied to music.
Yes.
Like there's a lot of other, I think a lot of Cunningham pieces, they learn the choreography and then totally separate from music. But I think Meryl was asking me earlier if that music plays a part in how I remember choreography. And I think that for me, I know I have musical cues, but it's not necessarily tied to. But I guess when I'm going over choreography, I do sing it to myself because it's so rare that we at New York City Ballet at least dance without music. And if we do, there's still a rhythm to it. So there is like stomp, 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 slide your foot. So there's that still. There's still that kind of rhythm that we have.
I was just inspired by what the PD demonstration was talking about, where it's different if you don't have the music. Like there's something that happens in your brain that suddenly it becomes like almost exercises. And exercises feel different than a dance. And I know personally, because I love dance so much, and that's what I do as a performer, there's something different about those performances. I can reach new heights. I can remember things from years past. I can revisit a piece from 10 years, and if I just sat in a room by myself, I could never remember those steps. But if you turn on the music, it's like something takes over my body, and I just remember it.
I wish we could scan your brain while you're dancing.
Let's put the electrodes on.
Everything light up.
You moved too fast. We couldn't hold you down. There's another dimension to this about music. It's a wonderful question. You've all experienced this. Memory is my bag. That's what I do for a living, is study memory in the brain. And one of the things that's extraordinary is musical memory. All of you have experienced hearing one note, and you just got back to your high school prom. Just one note, and you go, for me, it's Joe Bonamassa. I'm a blues guy, but it could have been whatever. That one note. So how does that get you? And it's not unlike what Rafi was talking about.
It's pattern completion.
Well, I was just going to say that, but he's there before me. No, seriously, no. We go on the road together. No, it's pattern completion. So, but in music, it doesn't take much. I don't know any music. I wouldn't know, middle high C from a G. But the fact is, one note, and I'm back in high school. So think about that in your personal experience. Music is not just sound in the air. Music connects to a lot of our personal experience in a unique way. Eric, studies this for a living about sound and the like. But just one of the quick, I apologize because I mentioned to some colleagues at the break, but dance without music. So when I was at UC Irvine for many years, and a colleague of mine was a choreographer, very famous guy. And when 9/11 happened, he was on the road. I don't know where he was. Let's say he was in Kansas. That night in his motel, he wrote a dance that was 9 minutes and 11 seconds long without any music. He just wrote it. And they came back, and then he hooked up with this wonderful jazz composer and musician, Japanese composer at UCI, and they put it to music. But when I talked to him about it, because I was just fascinated by it, that he's sitting in this motel, crushed by everybody in this room understands, and yet he was able to get a dance at 9 minutes, 11 seconds. And then when the music was added to it, it was magical. But here's a guy sitting in a room by himself that could do what you guys do without, you know what I'm talking about?
It's so interesting because this is what my project's going to be at CBA. It's I want to incorporate sign language into dance, because then you don't need music necessarily because you're saying something specific. How does language and dance, how do they come together to create a universal language? And that's just so fascinating to me that you brought that up.
Yeah. We have time for just a couple more questions.
I had a quick question regarding this. For myself as an artist, and do you see it in do you see a difference in terms of pattern completion or neurons between visual learners versus like auditory learners?
We know so little about pattern completion. We're just starting to open up that box. No, but I can tell you, actually, in our lab, we found pattern completion by chance when we're looking at the visual brain of mice. So we were activating neurons, and then we activated them together, And just as you would have predicted from what you heard today, the neurons that fire together, they wire together, fire together, wire together. And then by chance, we just turned on one of the neurons and we saw the whole group just go, wow, what is this? This is pattern completion. Turns out that the cortex, which is the largest part of our brain, seems to be naturally wired for pattern completion. So the prediction, we haven't yet looked at the auditory cortex, but the prediction is that it's going to be just the same, that we have some sort of machine up here, which is great at capturing cause and effect, the relations from the world, and linking them up and then triggering the whole thing from the beginning. It's actually, again, pattern completion is not just about dancing or about music, it's about behavior in general, and particularly about memory. We're just discussing at the break, the famous series of books by Proust, À la recherche de temps perdu, that starts when he bites into a madeleine, and that triggers, just like Tom was saying, that triggers suddenly a whole slew of memories from his childhood that takes him 6 books to tell the story. So this is pattern completion. It's a phenomenal part of our memory, our human experience, and also behaviors in animals. I mean, when an animal is doing a sophisticated behavior, guess what? They're probably doing pattern completion as well.
And he mentioned Swann's Way. Proust emphasized something that you all know. And you talked about auditory versus, lots of folks have strategies, it's great. I'm a memory guy. Think about olfactory memories. Think about your grandmother's kitchen. You can't tell me that. And it doesn't bring back Thursday. It brings back your summer with grandma. So olfactory memories have a way of triggering, you know that, ineffably. It triggers, you can't talk about it so much. Like, oh man, that's the day I went to this Indian market and I met my to-be wife. So the odors and olfactory memory is a beautiful, really not well understood dimension to it. But I guess what Rafi has done such a nice job with Eric doing is saying, we can encode our experiences and get them back amazingly well. And then our worlds can connect to that, our sensory worlds, our visual worlds, where some of you are visual learners, some of you are auditory learners, but then there's that olfactory thing that, it doesn't trigger the day it happened, it triggers a much richer and more ineffable thing. So we are, in a real way, the sum total of our memories. It's just like a tapestry, and every thread's a memory, and the texture and the design and the colors are the sum of our lives.
I'll add something to that. Unfortunately, this hasn't been done with dancers, but with people who are artists as well, or musicians. And those who are musicians have a lot more auditory cortex dedicated to hearing sound than those who are artists, who draw and so forth. And I imagine those who are dancers might have more motor cortex. And it's not like they got a bigger brain than others, right? So something has to lose out for something to be gained. And what is lost and gained is thought to be found, work by Helen Neville, is that if you're, let's say, blind from an early age, your visual cortex space shrinks and your auditory cortex space expands. And so you're dedicating more of your brain space. These connections that Rafi talked about are changeable. And that's what I think could be happening. Maybe you have a more visually dedicated cortex than the auditory.
Just real quickly on Eric's point, I guarantee you your kids and your kids' kids will have more thumb space in your cortex than anybody of us sitting in this room today.
What about Leonardo da Vinci?
He couldn't text.
We have time for one final question.
I'm interested in this pattern completion as it relates to both future planning and memory making. And I hope I can be clear about this question. What happens when our experiences rewire our perception of reality and it is erroneous and our false memories create false pattern completion that interface with a reality that does not exist? And what might that discourse look like?
Yeah, so this is the other side of this machine that we have on our shoulders. Know that if you buy the argument that we have a way to build a virtual reality and predict the future and trigger pattern completion, why doesn't evolution make it even bigger and better and faster so that we are even better at this? But it doesn't. And in fact, it's possible that if that happens, we become detached from reality. We become living in our own world. And in fact, we and other people have detected problems in this change of neuronal groups in mice models of schizophrenia. So it's possible that mental disease happens when this machine starts operating maybe on a turbo charge, but it's not anchored to the world. So there has to be a way by which nature is sort of holding the reins of these mechanisms so that they actually are useful to the animal. At the end of the day, what drives evolution is simply to pass your genes. So you just have to eat and reproduce and survive, not be eaten. Everything else is icing on the cake. So this thing we have on top of our heads, you should never forget that this is actually the whole purpose of evolution, has to ensure that we're successful as a species. So that would be a thought. That
One additional thing, you referred, I'll be arbitrary and talk about real memories and pathological memories. Be careful when you think about real memories. So I'll give you one. The idea is when you can feel a memory, you all in this room can have a memory that's absolutely real and not be true. Every one of us. Eyewitness testimony is virtually bankrupt for that reason. There's a woman named Beth Loftus. I invite you to look at her work. But I'll give you one study that is mind-boggling. I don't know, well, sure, most folks in the room remember the Challenger disaster, right? I used to, back at Yale, say, do you remember when a Kennedy was shot? And the kids would go, Ted Kennedy was shot? But let's talk about the Challenger disaster. There was a guy named Neisser in Atlanta, at Emory University, that did a study that is stunning. What he did the day it happened was go around the room, indicate, we'll go around the university, and immediately grab the autobiography of every kid that day. Where were you? What were you doing? We had dance class, we had chemistry class, what were you doing? And then he would follow them 1, 2, 3, 5 years later and just say, what'd you do? And I'm going to make up a scenario to capture that, because Mary Jo and I met in California 50 years ago. But let's say I was at Emory University that day, and Neisser came up to me and he said, Tom, where were you that day? And I would say, well, I was coming back from chemistry class, and I met Mary Jo coming back from art class, and we met in the quad, and we had our 2 fish sandwiches. She hates celery in it, and I like wheat bread. I'm being granular for a reason, really granular. And then we walked across the quad, and we looked inside, and kids were around the television, and they were crying, and they saw this. Anybody in the room know what I'm doing? That's a contrail separator. Right? So really granular memory. Then he follows me. So that's the memory that I had written down. That's the memory 5 years later. And so he had taken what I really was, and then 5 years later I gave you the memory I was, that I met Mary Jo and went to the quad. And the only problem with that is I hadn't met Mary Jo until the next year. Routinely. Why? I wasn't lying. We'd been together our whole life, so I was making the best of reality. And now that was not pathological. We all are trying to make sense of the world. And it's a lot of stuff out there, so we reconstruct it. Memories are reconstruction. Immediately I cannot convince you parked your car in Portugal. Right? So there's constraints on how we reconstruct it. But the fact of the matter is that I felt, and if you record it from my brain and you found the truth center, I'm telling the truth, it's a real memory, it's just not true. So when we think about our memories, it's not just a question of pulling up a Rolodex, it's dynamic. So without there's a lot out there.
Wow. Please help me thank you. Formal thank you, but I'm just here to assure you today really happened.
I can't do better than that, so I think we should just give the panelists a great thank you, and we're really